Hello, everybody. Your friendly death investigator here, and we're back. Welcome to our newest discussion episode. Hopefully, you enjoyed the recent episodes we did. It's been a minute. We've actually got a lot to go over today. Well, a lot, but we've actually got a decent amount to go over today for this episode. Hopefully, again, you enjoyed the Watts episode. That was actually, I'm very curious to hear some of the feedback. I've heard a little bit, but when I was making those episodes, I wasn't sure how they were gonna. Specifically how the daughters episode was gonna play, Bella and Celeste, and that was a case that I had sort of decided to do back in December, but I was already in the middle of editing John Agnew's case, so I already knew that was going to be January's episode. But I had a couple of friends and just like people message me on social media just as like suggestion. I always take suggestions for cases and write them down. Whether I can get the case or not is certainly always a question, but that was one of the ones that came up several times. And when I went with it, like there was a few reasons to go with it. A lot of this podcast was always meant to cover cases that were both popular and not so popular and sort of break down, what on the forensic level, what a lot of this stuff means. And so far I had done somewhat popular episodes. The Dermans episodes, they're certainly fairly popular. I know that other podcasts have covered them, but the case is fairly, it's been going on 7 years at this point. Since that case happened. So it wasn't super recent. So somewhat popular, but not that much and not that recent. And just something about the Watts case, and I guess specifically that wasn't that recent. It was a couple of years ago at this point, but the Netflix doc, I guess, had generated interest in it. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But it was fairly popular and a few people had sort of noted it. And when I looked online, the autopsy report was right there. Sometimes tracking them down can be somewhat difficult, but those were just kind of right there and it had all three of them. And I was like, oh, well, that kind of makes it easy. And Agnew's case was essentially done. So I kind of just jumped right into doing those. And it did not occur to me till I think I was just finishing up Shanann's case when I realized this was going to, I was going to be doing basically the mother and daughter's death in the month of February, which was some friends and friends and there's some other like podcaster folks that I'll talk to, and they found that amusing, which is something I didn't really think about. Like it crossed my mind. I was like, oh yeah, that is sort of, no one will notice, but they did. It wasn't my intention to have such a downer episode in February, especially around the day after Valentine's Day, I think. Just how the schedule was released, we released the girls episode. But it was a popular episode. I was like, okay, well, that'll be one of our popular ones. And then choosing Elisa kind of was, well, okay, let me get into that in a sec. Just to finish up the thought on the Watts cases. Again, I am curious exactly what people thought about those, because the moment I started writing Shanann's case and the moment I was kind of looking through the reports for the girls' case, it sort of dictated itself how they were going to be. I sort of found the angle into writing both those cases. And I think I alluded to in the last discussion that, I could have easily done 3 episodes, a case for each one. And that was something that was always like, that's probably not something I'll do that often. Because I kind of prefer the idea of, one episode is one person's, that it's, that's kind of their episode. But this was the first, the Watts Girls was the first one that it was a kid case. And I've helped investigate child deaths in the past. It's not that I'm numb to it like completely, but I'm more used to it, and it's not as jarring to me. And I'm always conscious about how that's going to play to people, how they are going to react to it. Because again, this show by design, it's, I don't know if dark is the best word for it, but morbid probably would be the best word. It's already got that kind of edge to it. And then kind of putting kid cases on top of that was, I knew eventually I would do, kid cases will come up, but not that often. And for that very reason, just because it's just one more thing. And that's ultimately why the girls' episodes, I just sort of put them together. And it kind of worked out as well that their autopsies were so similar. They were found in basically the exact same way that it kind of helped with that, where I was like, okay, it just makes sense to sort of put them together and not like milk it to 3 episodes, because it wasn't. I just don't know if I would have, like, it, I like to think, like, would I listen to this? Would I listen to 2 kid episodes in a row? And my thought process then was, I don't know. Now I say that's me. I guess that's weird for me to say, because the kind of show that I make and the kind of work I've done in the past, you would think I'd be like extremely into talking about this kind of stuff all the time, but I typically listen to like more comedy type stuff. I don't really. So whenever I think about things that I listen to, I try to think more of as a general audience. I know there's a lot of true crime lovers that reach out to me and they're like, we really enjoy it. And obviously this show is certainly for you, but I always try to keep in mind, like, if some random person just listened to this episode, like, would they want to hear back-to-back kid deaths? And the short answer I sort of thought to myself was probably not. But again, something could always come up that would change my mind. But at least for the Watts girls, I was like, I'll put them together. It also made sense of how they were found. Like, again, that case just sort of worked out where Shanann's body was found first. So it kind of made sense when structuring the show. And when you hear it, hopefully it makes sense how I did it, that her body was found first. So we immediately dive into her case. And then kind of at the end of it, we sort of jump back and say, well, that's not, it's not over yet. They were found next. And since they were so similar, I just decided to group them together. So, but again, hopefully you enjoyed it. I did, there was some feedback online that I got let me just say, the feedback I get online and the reviews I get, thank you guys. Like, if it can't be said enough. Like, when I initially made or like conceived this show, I had the biggest hang up in the world of whether anybody would actually want to like be into this, listen to this. Like, I knew that I would want to hear a show like this, and I knew that other death investigators or even pathologists would find it unique or useful. But I was never sure exactly how just a general audience, even true crime audiences, would take it. So like hearing y'all's all the like positivity, like on Twitter and Instagram, I just get so much positive feedback, and it truly means the world to me and what we're doing here. And the reviews as well. Like, I've read, like, again, the reviews have been great, and I think it was a positive review. I think the only, if you would even call it a negative, and I certainly wouldn't, was I forget who wrote it, but they were just like, I wish the episodes were longer. And I hear you. I do. But I don't know. If making the episodes longer would mean sort of padding them out more than they need to be. And I don't know. This was never just that show to just kind of drone on and on. And also some of the stuff can be kind of heady. So not like super intellectual or anything, but like there's a lot of ideas kind of flying at you at once. And I'm always kind of conscious of, kind of don't overstay your welcome. I guess just as a writer, that is always very much in my mind of, don't wear out your welcome, because again, the subject matter, you very much could. And that was something whenever, I think it was, I forget, it was this discussion 2 or 3. I was curious how people felt about Kathleen Peterson's episode versus John Agnew's episode, because Peterson's episode is by far the longest actual autopsy episode. It's right around 40 minutes or so. And it also kind of marks the last episode where I'm sort of going into like detail with, 3/4 inch this scar is this long, and, all those like little measurements for each and everything. I did that with her case, and it seemed when I started Agnew's case, he had a lot of injuries, and it just sort of felt like it was padding it out a little bit. It wasn't truly adding anything. There will be measurements that I'll like, okay, that's relevant, but these reports can be very meticulous sometimes, but at least on kind of a narrative level of sort of communicating that kind of stuff to you guys, you don't really need it. And that's something that it kind of became a learning process as I go along with this. And also I have a friend across the pond who reminded me that ultimately, I mean, even though and I've sort of looked at the analytics, but most of the listeners are from the U.S., but there are plenty of listeners, again, that are not. And my friend overseas reminded me, is like, yeah, you guys don't have the metric system, and everything that you're reading in these reports are, like, we don't know what a quarter inch is. So now I just sort of use that sparingly. And that wasn't the only reason that Peterson's episode was sort of padded out a little bit. They also had sort of if you listen, they do a little bit extra for her brain that needed going over. But yeah, the episodes are probably only ever going to be so long with this sort of thing, just because, again, I don't want to wear out my welcome. For now, anyway. I mean, maybe one day ego truly will take over, and I'll just go for 2 hours. God, I hope not. But yeah, thank you for the positive feedback. Thank you for the reviews, and this is as good a time as any. If you haven't reviewed, please. iTunes is great. It helps spread us around. I know all podcasters, I know we need those reviews, and we wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, because we sort of see the metrics and how, if we do get a review, suddenly we get just a small bump in listeners. Like, it just truly how their algorithms work. Yeah. But again, a rating is fine as well. Review, whatever you have time for, truly. But either way, the fact that you're listening now is as good as anything else. So yeah, thank you guys. So that was the Watts case. And so I was actually very ahead of schedule, and now I've sort of let myself get behind ever so slightly. So when Elisa Lam's case kind of came up, again, a friend of mine mentioned her case, and I was vaguely familiar. I sort of remember hearing about this case. It's because it'd been so long ago. But this was like back in December. Someone mentioned, like, hey, maybe do this case. And I was like, yeah, I'll look. Like, anytime anyone suggests any case to me, I think I may have already said this. Like, I'll always jot it down and see if I can get the report. Which here's another good reminder. I know many people probably don't just keep autopsy reports hanging around, but if this is something like if you have a case, if you're an investigator or anything like that, and you have access and don't mind sending it in, or if you have an interesting case, you can always email those to us, autopsypodcast@gmail.com. And there'll be, again, if it's interesting or even something that we can sort of find an interesting angle with, which is something we're doing for next month's episode, yeah, by all means, send those in. We'll take them. But with Lamb, the case was suggested to me, and I wrote it down, and I was like, oh, I'll get to it. And by that point, again, this was December, so Agnew was already being prepped to release, and I'd already decided on the Watts as February's episode, and I was sort of focusing on that. And when I wrote down Lamb's, I was like, I'll get to this eventually. This is definitely something I can do in the future. And right around mid-January, I actually did the Watts, Shanann and the Watts Girls episodes got written. Like, again, I was really ahead of schedule. Like, not long after Agnew's case was released, I was mostly finishing up the Watts cases, at least writing them. And I just remember seeing, because whenever Lamb was mentioned to me, I sort of glanced online and I mentioned in the episode, if you Google her name, you will go down numerous rabbit holes, and some of them are kind of insane. And I always knew, I was like, well, that's great. That's something, again, this show, part of doing this show was to sort of weed out kind of like fact and fiction as much as possible. So when I saw that, I was like, yeah, I'll do that down the road. And it just so happened I was just finishing up, I think, the Watts Girls episode, and was randomly scrolling through Twitter, as one does. And yet again, there was another podcast that brought up, I guess they had just made an episode about Elisa. And the whole, I don't remember what the name of the episode was, but on Twitter, at least, the post, their ad for it was, once again, what happened to Elisa Lam? And I had at least read through the case enough and glanced through it where I sort of had an opinion on it. And I don't know, just something like something about that tweet asking yet again the same question that I had seen over and over again at that point without even having to look that hard. I was just like, okay, you know what? This is getting fast tracked. So I very quickly grabbed that case and started writing that. And then that episode was written actually, middle of January and not quite the end of January, maybe around the 20th or so. It was done. And then I saw the first time I saw the ad for the Netflix series. And there was that like equal parts like excitement, like I had just finished up the Watts case and I was like, well, they have a Netflix series. It might generate some interest. We'll see, who knows. And then right as I'd finished writing the Lamb's case episode, and a couple days later, there was an ad. I think once again, I really need to get off Twitter more because it's going to keep coming up. I was on Twitter and saw a promo for the Netflix doc. And yeah, there was that worry of, oh, that's exciting. Like, this is a new, like, the Watts had kind of come and gone by the time I got to the episode. But suddenly it's like, oh, this is going to be a new thing that's going to drum up more interest. I'm going to have back-to-back interesting cases. But then there's always that, well, hopefully maybe for a lot of people. But I'd already written it and was like, I really, really hope there's not, because when I wrote it, like I did do some, I wouldn't really call it sleuthing, but I just, research. I went and looked and read through, whatever's available kind of publicly online, which is a lot, including like court documents that you can find tons of great information in those. And I'd written the episode based around that kind of stuff. But you're always conscious of like, well, this is a documentary, apparently a 4-hour documentary. And who knows what they could say? Who knows what new stuff they could bring up? So I was nervous, and then I did something somewhat ballsy. I was starting to get I could feel a cold coming on right around the beginning of February. So I went ahead and recorded Elisa's episode before the documentary came out. So I was actually extremely nervous to watch it because I'd already recorded it and was mostly not done with the full edit, but at least, cleaning up my audio. And finally just sat down and watched it. And, I'll say this. Whenever, at the end of the Watts episode, at the end of the Bella and Celeste episode, I make special mention of the Netflix doc because it was very, it was very useful. And so much so that I was like, when I was writing the episode, I was kind of going back and reviewing just kind of exactly what he said, when he said it, that kind of stuff. So it truly was a good research tool. And that's why I made special mention of it at the end. But I can't really say the same thing for Elisa Lamb's doc. And I was going to go into it, but I tell you what, I don't want to make it, I got to get to the actual main point of this episode. So I don't want to just kind of go off on it. But I think now's a good time to sort of reference something that I'm planning on doing starting next month. So Patreon. This isn't just a plug for Patreon. Patreon I've sort of revamped a little bit. Now there's like, I forget what the tiers were before, but now there's like a $3, a $5, and a $10. There might be more, but those are the 3, 5, and 10. And I think when I first started, I didn't have the $3 level because I didn't even know you could do that. But now, for general support, I do have, there's a $3 tier for Patreon. And I have a Buy Me Coffee, which I honestly, I'd have to look. You would think I would have some of this stuff in front of me. I'm sure it's Buy Me Coffee, Autopsy podcast, somewhere on there. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Patreon. What I think I'll do is I'll sort of give my mini review of both the Watts and Lamb's Netflix documentary. And if you're subscribed on the $3 level, I'm just going to post that as a bonus because I don't want to just go on and on here with that kind of stuff. But I bring that up because next month there is a project that I'm sort of tooling around with that would likely be just a mini spin-off thing that would likely be Patreon only. But it's not complete yet, but that was the whole reason I was sort of revamping Patreon to begin with. But I'll get to more of that next month. But if you want to hear what I have or what I think about the Netflix docs on both Watts and Lamb, and just kind of it's a good way to compare and contrast what was done right and what was done wrong. If you subscribe on Patreon at the $3 level, it'll just be available as a bonus thing. And that's patreon.com/autopsy podcast. So we'll go ahead and move along from that. But again, overall, I hope that you enjoyed the Watts episode, and I hope you liked Lamb's episode. Next month's episode, just as a tease, it's very much an episode of Autopsy, and the kind of episode that I was always planning to do when I started the show. But it's not a true crime case. It's not a particularly popular case. Some people might be familiar with it, but you'll probably understand more when it comes out. But it's different, a different kind of case, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. So that'll be coming out. Usually I try to do these episodes the first Monday of the month. So whatever the first Monday in April is, that'll be ready to go for you guys. So look forward to that. And I think that's mostly all I got for catching up on things since last time. I might have one last thing, and this one's not set in stone, but we'll see. There's another friend of mine who does a podcast, and it is not true crime. It is a very, very different. I've described it as just a complete gonzo piece of performance art that he does. And he does a lot of collaborations, and he's a really good dude to talk to. And he asked me if I would do this really funny. We had this idea because he does collaborations with lots of people, and he asked me to do one for him when he gets around. I'm not quite sure when we'll get to it, but at a certain point, you may hear me plug this kind of funny, crazy. Hopefully, you guys find it funny. We thought it was kind of hysterical, but hopefully it'll work out. And if it does, I'll give his show a plug and let you know when that'll be coming out. And that's basically it for catch-ups. So yeah, I'll move right along to the actual. So the title for this episode, I actually know what the title is. It's called Becoming a Death Investigator. I don't always know that whenever I record these things. But I knew this time because, like I said, if you guys ever have a question specifically, you can always email them or reach out on social media, and I'll answer the question to you then. But I always enjoy them because they give me an idea of what people actually want to listen to with these types of things. So Becoming a Death Investigator was inspired this week. I had a really, again, just a really positive, very polite, sweet email from Destiny from Michigan. Basically, she was wanting to know, a career path. She was interested in forensics and doing autopsies or maybe being a death investigator. And she was just curious how a career path for that worked. So that's going to be the topic for the week. Because like I said, if you have an idea, something you want me to talk about, I'll absolutely do it. So to answer that, there are a few offices that sort of integrate these two jobs, but most offices, at least in the U.S., most medical examiner offices, you have either your death investigator, what's our medical legal death investigator, but a death investigator, and you have your, they would call them morgue assistants or forensic pathology assistants or pathologist assistants. And again, some offices combine those, but most of them keep them separate, which is probably for the best. But being a death investigator, well, I would ultimately say a career path towards them. Most of the stuff you'll learn, you actually learn on the job. Now, being an actual investigator, they usually do prefer you to have, I don't know if an associate's degree is necessarily enough. Maybe, every office is a little different. There's no across the board requirements, but I think most of them at least require an associate's, but I think most you would need a bachelor's, and it can be biology, criminal justice, anything kind of related to that is what you need to be if you want to start a career as a death investigator. To be pathologist assistant just doing the autopsy, because I think we discussed before, like most autopsy offices, wow, most medical examiner offices, the pathologists themselves are not doing, they're not doing the cutting and the evisceration on every single case. They're qualified to do it. They can do it, but it's a lot of work. So most offices employ pathology assistants, and there's not really that much of a prerequisite or a requirement to become an assistant because it's all kind of on the job training. You can, I'm sure an associate's is required for most. I honestly don't think it is, but I could be wrong. But yeah, there's not a lot of requirements to it. You just sort of get in there and they kind of show you everything. And it's very much a technical skill. Yeah, I'd imagine at least a high school diploma or equivalent. But I would go ahead and at least consider an associate's degree if that's what you really want to do. Now, depending what office you go to, some pay more than others. So, yeah, bigger cities, you'll get a little bit more, but you're also paying more. Yeah, you know how it is. You're in a bigger city. You're paying more to live in the city. You get paid more. But overall, they're not exceedingly high-paying jobs all the time. Again, it depends on the office, but a lot of them aren't. And the same can probably be said for some investigator jobs. I've seen some investigator positions that don't pay very well at all. I've seen some that pay quite well. It's sort of, again, you just have to check your local listings for that. But having said that, if you truly dig the pathology part of it, if you don't really want to be an investigator and you want to be a pathology assistant and kind of make a career out of it, what I would suggest to do would be become what's known as a pathologist assistant, a PA. And there are a few, I don't know what all schools do them, but there's a few in the country that offer the program. And essentially, you're not a doctor, but when you walk in the morgue, you're basically qualified to do what they do. You do the full evisceration, and I guess a good contrast would be if you're just a pathology assistant, you do the full evisceration, you take the organs out of the body, but then you hand those off to the doctor who does their more meticulous cuts, the smart work side, and the assistant does the hard work. But if you're a pathology assistant or a pathologist assistant, the doctor, as near as I can tell, they're not really like there in the room. Like, you have qualifications and skills that are trusted enough that you go in. You either cut the body yourself or you have an assistant who cuts it, and you're actually trained to slice and dice the organs yourself. You know how to do the cuts, you know kind of what blood to get, you know how to fill out the paperwork, you know how to section the organs for histology, you know how to dictate the case, and then ultimately a doctor comes behind you when everything comes back, and the doctor, whatever doctor it is, they ultimately sign off on the case, but you have done kind of the brunt of the work. And that's actually, from everything I understood, if I could do it all again, that might have been something I considered doing, because those positions can actually pay very well. You can actually do really well. And one of the best examples of that, and this actually, I'm in no way affiliated with this lady, but she is by far one of the most popular people. If you're looking for someone online who does this kind of stuff, you probably already know about her. Her name is Nicole, I think it's Angemi, Nicole Angemi. She's got a Instagram thing. She's got a whole website. I think it's like iHeartAutopsy.com. I'm totally plugging her because she's one of the few people out there that's like, she is a pathologist assistant. She's out of Philly, I believe. And I know that because there's actually a PA school, in Philadelphia. So if that is something you want to do, and if you're really interested in this kind of stuff, I would suggest totally going for that, and look into kind of what she does, because if you look at her Instagram page, she posts graphic stuff, but if you're into this kind of stuff, it's very interesting. And I often wonder how she gets away with it, but, I'm sure she gets permission by whoever, but yeah, it's very graphic, and she just seems like a a pretty cool person. Like she's just out there a lot. Well, I guess she's mostly on Instagram, and she sort of has her own website thing going on. She's not on Twitter much, but yeah, if that's what you're looking for, I would totally suggest kind of looking into that. Looking at that school, check out her stuff. That'll give you a very good idea of what you'll be in for. You'll see all this stuff firsthand. And that's, when you become an investigator, there is, I can't remember if I've mentioned this on a previous discussion, but there is a certification that some offices find important and some don't. It's called, if you become an investigator, some offices would require you to be certified through the American Board of Medical Legal Death Investigators, ABMDI. And they have like your basic, you have to have a lot of on-the-job training and hours, and then a doctor has to recommend you get it. Like, this is typically something, you don't typically get this before you start working for an ME's office. This is something you get within a year or two after you work there, if they require it. Not all of them do. But you get so many hours. One of the doctors from the office has to write a letter of recommendation for you, and then you can actually sit and take the test. And there's I want to say there's like, the test is like 8 parts, I think. It's like an 8-part test. There's like 250 questions. And hopefully, a lot of this stuff you can study in a book, but a lot of it you're going to see firsthand if you're doing this stuff as a career. But again, not every office requires that. And yeah, I'll leave that at that. But that would be and again, I only mention it because it might, if this is a career path you want, just something to consider. Some offices require it, some don't. And I think that's mostly it as far as like choosing this as a career path. Now, this, for me, it was like getting into this line of work for as long as I did it was not something I ever had planned on doing. I had a criminal justice degree and a graduate certificate for something completely unrelated, and kind of just kind of fell into the position because I was looking for something more forensics and didn't really know what it was. And the job that I wound up taking that's another thing. Another reason to do this is some people fall into these lines of work and they don't know what they're getting into, and they wash out pretty quickly, because where I worked, and I think where a lot of people wind up getting these kind of positions, those job descriptions are vague, to say the least. Like, they do not necessarily tell you like what all you'll actually be doing. And if you don't understand that, and you get there day one and they show you around the morgue area, yeah, it can be jarring. And I, like, full disclosure, it was totally jarring for me. I had, like, based on the job description they gave, when I walked in day one and started walking around, I was like, this is insane. I had no idea. But I kind of kept at it, and every day is something new. And it's like you'll see kind of the same cases 100 times, 1,000 times, but there's still something like very refreshing most days. Most days you'll kind of get used to seeing certain kinds of cases. But there's always going to be one, even the kind of case that you've sort of seen before, you'll be working on. You're like, oh, this is different. I've never seen this on a person before. Like, it becomes very interesting on that level. And I stuck with it, a few months. And just after a few months, I was like, this is great. I loved it. And it's one of the reasons, like, I got out of it. But there was just this thing about, like, looking back, I'd learned so much, and I knew that there was a world out there that didn't quite understand everything that kind of gets done. It's one of there's a lot of things that sort of inspired me to do a show like this. But getting away from that job and sort of seeing, because while you're in it, you're just, you wonder why nobody sort of understands things a certain way. But when I got away from it, I was like, oh, well, of course nobody understands it this way. How could they? Like, you start seeing it more from when you were just Joe Schmo again, like I once was, like I kind of am now. Like, it's not that hard, but like some offices have like most offices have communication issues, especially communication to the public. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Not to be too critical, but there's legal issues and, kind of how things if you misspeak one little thing these days, it gets blown out of proportion so fast. So like legal legal teams are really tightening their grip more and more around these offices. So I get it. Like I don't try to be overly critical for anybody, but it kind of opens up an opportunity for what I'm doing. And couldn't be more grateful for that. And I can't be more grateful that people actually are interested in it. And I think I'll basically leave it right here, or right there rather. That's everything I really wanted to touch on this week. Again, if you haven't rated or reviewed, ratings only take a second, just a click. And if you have the time, please leave a review. Doesn't even have to be that long. Whatever you have time for. And again, right after I do this, I'm going to jump right into a discussion about about the Netflix documentaries. And if you want to listen to that, those will be on patreon.com/autopsy podcast, and they'll be available from the lowest tier, which is the $3 level. And I think I'll leave it like that. The next episode will come out first Monday in April, and then you'll have another discussion episode from me in the middle of the month. And until that time, I will see you guys around. Take care of yourselves and each other.